Need to rivet without a gun rivets are used both to seal two materials together and as decoration. They can be small and found on various clothing items or significant in automobiles, machinery, and numerous other things. Normally, rivets are placed on the item using a rivet gun or special rivet tool. But what if you don't have this tool? Is it challenging to learn how to use rivets without a gun? Surprisingly, it is not difficult, but in fact, more straightforward than you think. What is a rivet nut? Rivet nuts can be plastic or solid metal, and they are sometimes called blind rivets because you can fasten them entirely from one side of the work. It also looks like they got there by magic, because if they're installed correctly, you won't see any screws or nails holding them in. Once you drill a hole and place a rivet in that hole, the rivet is essentially pressed on both sides, and it then changes shape and becomes one piece of plastic or metal. One of the reasons rivet nuts are so popular is because they are so tough, and once they're installed, they're virtually impossible to remove or dislodge. They can be installed into a blind hole quickly and easily, especially if you have a rivet gun. Rivet nuts usually create a bulge on the blind side of the work or go into a sleeve and become less obvious. Rivets can be used in race cars, appliances, sailboats, golf carts, and even display cases. What happens to the rivets once you install them properly is that they are deformed to prevent them from falling out of the item. Rivets are tight enough to hold themselves back and therefore don't need additional fastening, although many people screw them in with screwdrivers or even with bolts after installing them. Learning to fasten a rivet without a gun isn't tricky, but it does present some challenges. This means you may have to practice it a few times to get it right. Installing plastic rivets without a gun. You can find plastic rivets in many different items, including electronics, furniture, certain vehicles, and even toys. It is sometimes difficult to separate them because they are so strong. Remember that rivets are sometimes two-part items, and once installed correctly, they become one item, though not all of them are like this. To install plastic rivets, push them through the holes you dedicated for the rivets, and make sure you push them hard. Why? So that the stem inside of the rivet pops out from the top. Afterward, go ahead and pull the rivet out of the hole. For this, you may want to use pliers so that your hand isn't accidentally injured. When you pull out the rivet, the threads located inside the rivet get locked at its top. Eventually, the pin will break and get tightened as you keep pulling on the rivet. As mentioned earlier, it may not happen the right way the first time you attach a plastic rivet, and it may even ruin the rivet. But with a bit of practice, the task will become much more manageable. Installing solid rivets without a gun. Solid rivets work a little differently than plastic ones. Plastic rivets can be installed with your bare hands and nothing else, but the same cannot be said for solid rivets. For the best results, you'll want a bolt that has a nut of its own and one that can easily fit inside of the rivet. First, place the rivet into the hole of the item, then put the bolt through the washer or bushing. You'll be doing this to thread onto the loose nut and make it work right. Next, keep inserting the bolt as far as it will go. Make sure you complete this step properly, or the rest of the steps won't matter. After the bolt is inserted, screw the rivet manually until it fits inside perfectly. Once you know it fits just right, you can unscrew the bolt that surrounded the rivet. It should now fasten the pin and be very well deformed if done correctly. At this point, the process should be completed, but again, keep in mind that installing steel rivets without a gun can be difficult. Steel rivets are very solid, and therefore, you may need a tool to install them properly. Although this method does work, you may have to practice it for a while to achieve perfection. Things to keep in mind. Most of the time, you'll need a bolt with its nut that fits into the rivet nut if you don't have a dedicated rivet tool or gun. It would help if you had a washer or a larger bushing that fits around the bolt pretty tightly for even better results. Even without the gun, you will still need a few tools, including an open-end wrench and a pair of water pump pliers or a second wrench that can hold the top of the machine bolt or screw tightly. Remember that once you place the rivet nut into the hole, you'll have to thread on the loose nut, then put the bolt through either the bushing or washer. Insert the bolt as far as it will go, then manually screw it in until the washer and nut don't allow you to screw it in any further. Finally, you'll be loosening the nut, then unscrewing the bolt from the rivet nut, in which case, should fasten it securely. This method, as well as the ones mentioned earlier, does not always work. You'll have to try the techniques on your project to see the results. In conclusion, the bottom line is this: a rivet gun works best when it comes to installing a rivet nut. This is always the case. Some people try using an anvil and hammering the rivet nut in, but that method has its challenges. Try these methods to see if they work for you, and again, this may take some practice, but is an excellent alternative to not getting the job done at all.